In May of 2026, an underground search for gold in central Laos turned into a frantic rescue operation. 5 men were pulled alive from the mountain, 2 remained missing, and the recovery effort was eventually haunted by a rhythmic knocking sound echoing from the stone. Saisambun Province is a remote, vertical landscape of steep limestone peaks. The region lacks the paved paths, railings, or infrastructure found in more accessible mountainous areas. The cave consists of 5 distinct chamber zones connected by tight crawls and sudden drops. This segmented structure forced the local villagers to move through a series of restrictions as they descended in search of minerals. While the men were deep inside, heavy seasonal rain began hitting the mountain's exterior. Water falling on this terrain finds cracks, gathers in unseen channels, and drains directly into the rock system. This hydrology creates a trap. Water bypasses the outer entrance, bleeding through the porous rock to fill the lowest passages. The system floods from the inside out, sealing the exit before the occupants realize the weather has changed. Between the first and second chamber zones, the passage forces a severe restriction. The gap is only 60 centimeters wide. By the 150-meter mark, the men were in total darkness, meaning any sudden rise in water would cut off their retreat. As floodwaters began pooling in the choke points, one member of the party was still close enough to the outer route to realize the danger. He fought his way back through the tightening, water-filled crawls, reaching the entrance as the passages were closing. His immediate report turned a hidden underground incident into an active rescue operation, providing the first confirmation that 7 men were trapped inside. Local authorities and Thai rescue workers converged on the site, turning the narrow entrance into a staging ground. They brought in heavy water pumps, oxygen tanks, and specialized diving equipment to support the push into the flooded system. The logistical difficulty was absolute. To reach the survivors, rescuers had to pass through the same flooded choke points that had already trapped the miners. Cave diving in these conditions is a struggle against zero visibility. The water is thick with mud, and because the ceiling is solid rock, a diver cannot swim upward to reach air. The only way out is back through the same narrow restriction they entered. At the 250-meter mark, the cave reached a 45-degree descent that drops roughly 50 meters into the mountain. Filled with muddy floodwater, this section became a dangerous chute that slowed the diver's progress to a crawl. In a flooded cave, speed increases the risk of disorientation. Every meter gained requires methodical testing of the passage ahead, treating each advance as a calculated risk. After days of pumping water and clearing blockages, divers pushed past the steep descent. On May 27th, they reached the 5th chamber zone. They found 5 men alive on a rocky ledge. After more than a week in the cold and damp with no food, the survivors were exhausted and physically weak. Finding the men was the first breakthrough. Bringing them to the surface required a dangerous technique known as a trust me dive. In a trust me dive, an expert diver must physically guide an untrained person through a completely submerged passage. The survivor has to breathe through a regulator and remain calm while the diver controls their every movement. This requires intense physical control. If the survivor panics or grabs at the equipment while moving through a jagged rock crevice, the situation can become fatal for both people. One man was guided out through a 37-minute underwater extraction. Shortly after, the water levels dropped enough that the remaining 4 men were able to crawl and climb their way out with rescuer assistance. 5 men were successfully extracted from the mountain. However, the operation remained active because 2 members of the original group were still missing. The cave continues beyond the 5th chamber toward the 350-meter gold panning zone. This dashed, unmapped route leads deeper into the mountain, representing a final void that divers had not yet explored. Underground, a distance of only 20 meters can be impassable. If the connecting passage is a narrow crack filled with muddy water, any survivors in a deeper air pocket remain physically unreachable. On May 31st, the weather turned. Heavy rain refilled the cave, a drainage pump failed, and water levels rose back to the 2nd chamber, forcing divers to retreat from the deeper sections. With the main route blocked, rescuers began searching the mountain's exterior. They used radar and terrain analysis to look for alternate shafts or cracks that might connect to the unmapped area. On June 1st, rescuers reported hearing a rhythmic knocking sound from inside the mountain. When workers knocked on the rock, they heard what seemed to be a response. However, rock and water can distort and reflect sound in ways that make the origin impossible to verify. A knock can travel through cracks and appear to come from a location far from its actual source. 5 men survived the extraction, but 2 remain beyond the unmapped restriction. For the families, the story persists as an agonizing question, left with only the unexplained echoes from the rock.